They told her she was broken. They told her the silver in her blood was a disease. They hunted her through frozen forests for 3 years, burned every record that proved she existed, and killed the only man who knew her secret. And they almost won. But here is what they did not know. The thing they spent 60 years trying to destroy was not a weakness. It was the most terrifying power the pack world had ever seen. And the night the Alpha King found her bleeding in the dark, the night he looked into her eyes and felt the bond snap into place like a chain neither of them chose, was not the night she was finally caught. It was the night her enemies made the last mistake they would ever make. Because she had not been running from him. She had been running toward him. For 3 years. And she had been waiting. Patient, silent, sharpening something in the dark that no one knew she carried. For exactly this moment. The moment the most powerful alpha in 7 territories realized that the lost, bleeding girl in his forest was not lost at all. She was the only living weapon that could bring his entire world to its knees. Or save it. Stay with me. Because the twist that happens in the final episode of this story broke every person who heard it. An old man's hand. A shattered instrument. A woman named Marin who died alone in a room with no windows 60 years ago. And a girl made of silver light who walked into the morning and set her free. If you leave now, you will never know what she said to the Alpha King when he finally asked her what happens next. And I promise you, those 4 words will live in your chest for the rest of the week. Do not skip. You have never heard a story like this one. And you will never forget the moment it ends. The girl ran like something the forest wanted to swallow whole. Her bare feet slammed into the freezing mud, each impact sending cold agony up through her shins and into her spine. The pine trees rose around her like black cathedral columns, their needles hissing in the wind, releasing that sharp green scent that had once meant safety to her. Tonight it meant nothing. Behind her she could hear them. 6 wolves from the Blackmore pack, their massive paws thundering against the earth, their breath erupting in white plumes through the dark. She did not look back. Looking back was how you died. Her lungs screamed inside her chest, burning like she had swallowed embers, and still she pushed harder. Her legs churning through ankle-deep mud that grabbed at her like cold, hungry hands. A root caught her foot. She went down hard, her palms shredding open against a carpet of pine needles and stone. Her chin grazing the frozen ground with a crack that rattled her teeth. The wolves were 30 feet behind her now. 20. She felt the displaced air against the back of her neck as the first one lunged. Then everything stopped. Not slowed. Up. A sound split the forest in half. Not a howl, not a roar, but something between the two, something ancient and absolute that seemed to vibrate inside the marrow of her bones and squeeze. The wolves froze mid-stride, their massive bodies locking up as though the sound had reached inside them and grabbed their spines. He turned. He stood at the tree-lean. Every story she had ever heard about the Alpha King had described him in superlatives she had dismissed as myth. Too tall, too broad, too terrifyingly still. Every single story had been an understatement. He was enormous, well over 6.5 feet of dense, battle-carved muscle. His dark hair wild against his jaw. His chest heaving slowly beneath a torn shirt that had clearly survived something catastrophic tonight before she had. His eyes were the color of molten amber. Not warm, not inviting, but burning like the last light inside a dying star. He looked at the 6 wolves the way a glacier looks at a city it has decided to consume. "Leave," he said. 1 word. 1 syllable. The Blackmore wolves broke and fled, their paws scattering mud and dead needles as they dissolved back into the dark, whining sounds trailing behind them like smoke. She stood slowly, pressing her bleeding palms against the sides of her thighs, lifting her chin, refusing to let the trembling in her legs travel upward into her expression. He turned those amber eyes to her. She felt at the moment it happened, that deep cellular recognition that every wolf was taught to fear and hunger for in equal measure. A bond. It moved through her chest like a hook pulled through warm water, slow and inevitable, tethering something deep inside her to something deep inside him. She watched his face change. The Alpha King, Selim Draveth, ruler of 7 packs, the wolf who had ended the Blood Schism War with his bare hands, went completely, utterly still. His nostrils flared. He smelled it too. She could see the exact moment it registered, the way his pupils dilated, the way his jaw tightened like the bolt of a vault slamming shut. "That is not possible," he said, and his voice was no longer commanding. It was fractured. He took one step back. His gaze dropped to her hands, to the blood seeping from her torn palms, and his expression shifted from fractured to something she could not name, something that looked dangerously close to fear wearing the mask of fury. "Who are you?" he said. Not a question. A demand issued by a man who had never in his life been refused an answer. "No one," she said. She watched him move. Not walk, not stride, but close the distance between them in that liquid predatory way that apex wolves moved, as though the space between 2 points simply agreed to become smaller for them. He stopped 1 foot in front of her. This close, she could smell him. Iron and wood smoke and something older, like stone after lightning has kissed it, a scent that made every instinct she possessed scream and sing simultaneously. "Your blood," he said quietly. His amber eyes searching her face with an intensity that felt like being held underwater. "Smells like a ward breaking." She said nothing. "Every ward," he continued, his voice dropping lower. "On every border of every pack in the Northern Territory. I felt them fracture 10 minutes ago." He reached out and took her wrist with a grip that was iron and inevitable, turning her torn palm upward between them. The blood there was not red. It had not been red for 3 years. It was silver, not metaphorically, not the pale silver pink of moonlight on skin, but true silver, luminous and liquid, welling up from her wounds with a soft, cold light that turned the space between their faces into something cathedral and terrible. She watched the Alpha King's breathing stop. She watched him stare at her blood the way generals stare at maps when they realize they have misread the entire war. "You are not a rogue," he said. "No," she agreed. "You are not unmated. No. You are not lost." She met his eyes. Those burning amber eyes that had just watched 6 wolves flee from a single sound. And she held his gaze with the steady, cold patience of someone who had spent 3 years learning exactly how long fury could be contained before it became something else entirely. "I was never lost," she said. "I was waiting." She felt the bond between them pull taut, electric and merciless. She felt the exact moment he understood that the power he had sensed in her, the thing he had mistaken for vulnerability, for damage, for the broken animal desperation of a girl running through a frozen forest, was not a wound. It was a weapon. It was a weapon she had spent 3 years sharpening in the dark, feeding it her silence and her blood and every night she had survived that he did not know about. Her silver blood rose a fraction higher in her palm, and the light it cast on his face was cold and absolute. The Alpha King, who feared nothing, who had ended a war with his hands, took one breath that was not entirely steady. And for the first time in 7 years of rule, Selim Draveth took a single step back. She closed her bleeding fist. "I have been looking for you," she said quietly, "for a very long time." The forest breathed around them, pine sharp and frozen and waiting. "And I did not come to be found." The Alpha King's lost mate Part 2. The silence that followed her words was not empty. It was full, packed dense with the sound of wind moving through pine needles, with a distant crack of a frozen branch surrendering somewhere deep in the dark, with the sound of Selim Draveth's breathing as he stood before her and processed what she had just said. She watched him the way she had learned to watch everything over the last 3 years. carefully, from behind a wall of absolute stillness. She had spent so long learning to make herself unreadable that it had stopped feeling like performance and started feeling like skin, this careful, composed surface she wore over the thing that churned beneath it. He was still staring at her closed fist. She could see the effort it cost him not to reach for it again, the slight forward lean of his enormous frame, corrected immediately, the flex of his jaw, the way those amber eyes moved from her hand to her face and back again as though he was trying to solve an equation that kept changing its own variables. But let him work for it. You came looking for me, he said finally. His voice had recovered some of its authority, but not all of it, and she filed that detail away with the precision of someone who had learned that details were the only currency that kept you alive. Yes, she said. And yet you were running. I was running from them, she said, tilting her head back in the direction the Blackmore wolves had fled. Not from you. There is a difference. He studied her face for a long moment, and she felt the weight of his attention the way you feel the pressure of deep water. Not painful but present, inescapable, informing every inch of your skin that you are somewhere you were not built for. The Blackmore pack does not operate this far north without sanction, he said slowly. No, she agreed. They do not. She watched him arrive at the conclusion on his own, watched it move through his expression like weather across open terrain. First the recognition, then the calculation, then the cold, controlled anger that settled over his features like armor being fastened into place. Someone sent them, he said. Someone has been sending them, she corrected. For 3 weeks. This is the 4th time. Something shifted in his eyes. Not softness. She did not think this man did softness, or if he had ever possessed it. The years and the war and the weight of 7 packs had worn it away the way a river wears away stone, slowly and completely. But something adjacent to it. Something that looked like the precursor to rage on behalf of another person. She did not let herself react to it. She could not afford to let herself react to it. You have been hunted for 3 weeks, he said. And you did not come to me. I did not know if I could trust you. The words landed between them like a stone dropped into still water, and she watched the ripples move through his expression. Surprise first, because she suspected very few people had ever said those words to Selim Draveth, and then something darker, something that looked almost like understanding. And now, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. She took in the breadth of his shoulders, the old scar that ran from his left jaw down beneath his collar, the way he stood with a particular stillness of someone who had learned that being the most dangerous thing in a space meant you never needed to perform your danger. She thought about 3 years of running. 3 years of sleeping in places that were never meant for sleeping, of eating what she could find and going without when she could not, of waking at every sound with her heart in her throat and her power coiled tight in her chest like a living thing straining against its cage. 3 years of being alone with something inside her that she did not fully understand and could not fully control and could not tell a single person about because the last person she had told was dead. Now, she said, I am running out of options. It was not the answer he wanted. She could see that clearly. The slight tightening around his eyes, the controlled exhale through his nose. But it was the true answer. And she had decided, somewhere in the frozen dark of the last 3 weeks, that if she ever stood in front of this man, she would give him nothing but true answers. Lies required energy she no longer had to spare. Come, he said. He turned toward the tree line expecting, as men like him always expected, to be followed without negotiation. She did not move. He stopped. He turned back, and she could see the surprise on his face, naked and genuine, before it was replaced with something more measured. I will not beg, she said. And I will not be commanded. If I come with you, I come as something other than a subject. The wind moved through the pines above them, sending a cascade of cold down through the branches, and she felt it against the back of her neck like a warning or a blessing. She was never entirely sure which. Selim Draveth looked at her for a very long time. "What is your name?" he said. "Saren," she said. He repeated it silently. She could see the shape of it on his lips without sound, and something about the sight of that, this enormous, fearsome man giving her name that careful, private attention, moved through her like a current she was not prepared for. She held herself still against it. "Saren," he said aloud. "Come with me." "Not as a subject." He paused. "As whatever you need to be." It was not a perfect answer, but it was an honest one. She started walking. His territory began where the pine forest thinned and the land opened into something that felt less like nature and more like intention. Rolling hills of black grass that moved in the wind like the surface of dark water, stone outcroppings that rose from the earth in formations too deliberate to be accidental, and in the distance, set against a sky that had begun its slow transition from black to the deep bruised purple of approaching dawn, the silhouette of Ashenmoor Keep. She had seen drawings of it. Drawings did not capture it. It rose from the hillside as though it had not been built but grown, its dark stone towers reaching upward like the fingers of something buried trying to pull itself free, its walls thick and ancient and stained with centuries of weather and history and, she suspected, blood. It was enormous. And it was beautiful in the way that storms are beautiful, completely indifferent to whether or not you survived your appreciation of it. She walked beside Selim rather than behind him, and after a single moment of adjustment, he did not attempt to correct this. They moved in silence for a time, and she was grateful for it. She was not a person who filled silence reflexively, who papered over the absence of words with nervous chatter. Silence was where she did her best thinking. And she needed to think. The Blackmore Pack's presence tonight meant the person who had been hunting her was escalating. For the first 2 weeks, it had been scouts, single wolves, fast and careful, tracking her scent and retreating before she could identify them. Then pairs. Then, 10 days ago, a group of 4 who had cornered her against a ravine and who had not retreated when she showed them what her blood could do. She had not enjoyed what happened next. She had not enjoyed the look on their faces as they fled, screaming sounds that were not quite human and not quite animal. She had not enjoyed the silver light that had poured from her hands like water and moved through the air with a cold, purposeful intelligence that she had not directed and could not entirely explain. She had not enjoyed how easy it had been. That was the part that frightened her most about what lived inside her. Not the power. The ease of it. "You have gone quiet," Selim said beside her. "I was already quiet," she said. "Quieter," he said. She glanced at him sideways and found him watching the middle distance ahead of them with the same alert, scanning attention he had probably maintained since adolescence. Eyes moving, reading the landscape, cataloging every shadow and every shift in the air. "I am thinking about who sent the Blackmore wolves," she said, which was true if incomplete. "I have thoughts about that as well," he said. "Would you share them?" He was quiet for a moment. She got the impression this was also unusual for him, being asked to share his thoughts rather than simply having people receive them as declarations. "There are 3 people with both the standing to sanction Blackmore operations and the motivation to want something hunted quietly, without my knowledge," he said. "My brother Taran, who has contested my right to the Northern Territories for 4 years. Elder Voss of the Conclave, who has been uncomfortable with the consolidation of pack authority under a single alpha for considerably longer than that. And a woman named Mira Solt, who runs Blackmore herself and who has historically required very little external motivation to cause problems." "It is not Mira Solt," Saren said. He looked at her sharply. She would not send her own wolves into territory this close to Ashenmoor without significantly greater incentive than personal ambition, Saren continued. "This is not her operation. She is a weapon, not a general. Someone is pointing her. Selim was quiet for 3 full steps. You know a great deal about pack politics for someone who has been living outside pack structure, he said carefully. Yes, she said. That is not an explanation. No, she agreed. It is not. She felt him look at her again, that heavy amber attention that pressed against her like a physical thing, and she met it briefly before returning her gaze to the keep ahead of them. I will explain everything, she said. But not in an open field before dawn with Blackmore scouts potentially still in the area. When we are inside. When I know the exits. Beat of silence. When you know the exits, he repeated. And there was something in his tone that was not quite amusement but was adjacent to it. I have survived 3 years of being hunted, she said. I did not do it by entering spaces without knowing how to leave them. Fair, he said. And they walked the rest of the distance to Ashenmoor Keep in silence, the black grass whispering against their legs, the dawn pressing its purple bruise across the horizon behind them, and the bond between them stretching taut and luminous and unaddressed, like a wire both of them had agreed, for now, not to touch. The keep was warmer inside than its exterior suggested. Stone corridors lined with iron sconces, the flames in them burning low and amber, throwing long shadows across tapestries that depicted battles she recognized from history she had read in the years before everything fell apart. Wolves in their shifted forms, enormous and terrible. Fields of dead. A man standing at the center of one tapestry. Younger, no scar on his jaw, with his arms raised and silver light pouring from his hands like. She stopped walking. She stared at the tapestry. Selim stopped 2 steps ahead of her and turned back, following her gaze. The silence between them changed temperature. That is the Battle of Gorvast, he said. 60 years ago. My grandfather, Aldrich Draveth, ended the siege. The light, she said. In the tapestry. A stylistic choice by the weaver supposedly, he said. Supposedly, she repeated. She turned to look at him. He held her gaze with an expression that was carefully neutral in a way that told her the neutrality was deliberate and costly. We will talk, he said, when you know the exits. She looked at him for one long moment, and then she nodded, and they walked on. He brought her to a room in the eastern tower. Not a cell, not a servant's chamber, but a room of real size and substance, with a window that faced the dawn, a fireplace already occupied by living flame, and a bed that looked like it had not been used in some time but had been maintained as though it might be needed at any moment. There was a door at the far end of the room beyond the fireplace. She walked to it and opened it without asking permission. A second room, a study, small, with its own door leading to a stairwell. She walked to that door and opened it too. Stone stairs spiraling downward. She could smell the outside air drifting up from somewhere below. An exit. She closed the door and turned around. Selim was leaning against the doorframe between the 2 rooms, his arms crossed, watching her with an expression she was beginning to catalogue as his default. Patient, calculating, and containing something beneath the patience that was neither patient nor calculated at all. Satisfied, he said. Provisionally, she said. She came back into the main room and stood by the fireplace, letting the heat press against her back, and she looked at him across the space between them, and she began to talk. She told him about her mother first. About the village at the edge of the Karath Mountains where she had grown up, pack-adjacent but never formally enrolled. Her mother a healer who was respected and quietly feared in equal measure, who had silver in her bloodline going back further than records tracked. She told him about the winter she was 15, when her mother had sat her down by a fire not unlike this one and explained to her what lived in their blood and what it meant and what it required of them. She told him about the years of learning, not the explosive, uncontrolled power that had emerged in the ravine 10 days ago, but the careful, disciplined work of understanding what she carried, The same way a person might spend years understanding a river before they attempted to redirect it. She told him about the scholar she had found when she was 19, a man named Osric who had devoted his life to the histories of silver-blooded wolves, what the old texts called them, what powers were documented across generations, what the silver bloodline had been used for and suppressed for and feared for across the centuries. He paused there. She looked at the fire. "Osric is dead," she said. "He was killed 14 months ago. His home was burned. His records were taken." She felt Selim go very still across the room. "Someone destroyed the records," she continued, "and then began looking for me. I do not know how they knew I had been in contact with Osric. I do not know what they found in his records that told them what I was. But within a month of his death, the scouts began." She turned from the fire to look at him. "I have spent the last 14 months trying to understand who killed him," she said. "And trying to understand what I am capable of before whoever is hunting me finds me and makes that decision for me." The fire crackled between her words and his response. Selim uncrossed his arms and pushed off the doorframe and walked slowly into the room, not toward her but to the window, where the dawn was now fully committed, pouring pale gold light across the floor between them. "Silver-blooded wolves," he said. "The Conclave calls them aberrations. The old texts, the ones the Conclave did not burn, call them Morvanen, Munta, born with something in their blood that predates the pack structure, predates the alpha hierarchy." She said nothing. Let him continue. "My grandfather had it," he said. "The tapestry is not stylistic. The weavers recorded what they saw." He paused. "He told my father it was a curse. My father told me it was a legend. I have spent 11 years as Alpha King believing the bloodline died with Aldrich." He turned from the window. The dawn light was behind him now, turning him into a silhouette rimmed in gold, and she felt the bond between them pull in the particular way it had been pulling since the moment they had stood in the frozen forest. Not demanding, not aggressive, but persistent, like a tide that does not crash but simply rises. "It did not die," he said. "No," she said. "It scattered, hidden, diluted across generations until it mostly disappeared." She looked at her closed hand. "Except when it did not." "What can you do?" he said. She opened her hand. The wounds from the pine needles and stone had stopped bleeding, but the silver had not entirely retreated. It traced the lines of her palm in thin, luminous threads, like a map of something older than cartography. "I can break wards," she said. "You felt that tonight. Any ward, any binding, any seal that uses pack magic as its foundation, I can unmake it." She felt the weight of that land in the room. "The border wards," he said slowly. "All 7 packs. Yes. You could walk through any border in the Northern Territory. I could do more than walk through them," she said. "I could take them apart entirely. Every border ward your 7 packs maintain. The ones that keep rival packs out, the ones that contain certain areas from civilian access, the ones that seal the Conclave's vault in Northmere." He paused. "All of it." The silence that followed was enormous. She watched him process it, watched the Alpha King's mind move behind those amber eyes, assembling and reassembling the implications, and she could see the exact moment he arrived at the same conclusion she had arrived at 14 months ago standing in the ruins of Osric's burned library. "If someone wanted to dissolve pack authority," he said quietly, "not through war, not through politics, but fundamentally, if someone wanted to tear apart the structural magic that holds the pack system together, they would need me," she said. "Or they would need you dead before you could be used against them," he said. She nodded. "So whoever is hunting you," he said, "is one of 2 things. Either someone who wants to use you." He paused. "Or someone who is afraid of what you are and wants to ensure you cannot be used by anyone." "Yes," she said. I have been trying to determine which for 14 months. And she hesitated. This was the part she had not told anyone. This was the part that had kept her awake in 100 different borrowed shelters, staring at ceilings and listening to the dark and turning it over and over in her mind like a stone she kept hoping would look different from a new angle. I think, she said carefully, it is both. He waited. I think there are two separate parties, she said. I think one of them wants me dead. And I think the other wants me alive. She looked at him. And I think they are currently competing with each other, which is the only reason I am still breathing. The fire popped and sent a brief cascade of sparks up into the chimney. Selim moved, slowly, deliberately, to the chair beside the fireplace and sat in it, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. His amber eyes on her with an intensity that would have been destabilizing if she had not spent 14 months building herself into something that could withstand destabilizing things. Sit down, Saren, he said quietly. Not a command. Not quite. More like something a person says when they are aware that another person has been standing for too long and carrying too much weight and has perhaps forgotten that there are alternatives. He sat. The chair across from him was deep and warm from the proximity of the fire, and when she settled into it, something in the muscles of her back and shoulders released a tension she had not been consciously aware of maintaining, and for one vulnerable, unguarded second, she felt the full weight of 3 years of exhaustion press down on her like a hand. She controlled her expression. But he saw it. She could tell by the slight change in the way the calculating intensity shifted fractionally into something that had no good word. Not pity, not sympathy exactly, but a kind of recognition, the look of someone who understood the specific weight of carrying something enormous for a very long time alone. Your grandfather, she said, because she needed to redirect before that look undid something she could not afford to have undone right now. Did he ever mention what else the silver blood could do beyond breaking wards? Selim was quiet for a moment, accepting the redirection without comment. He spoke of it rarely, he said. What my father passed down to me was fragmentary. Impressions more than information. He paused. He said that in battle it responded to threat, that it moved through him like a second instinct, that it was not something he controlled so much as something he entered into agreement with. She felt the accuracy of that description move through her like a struck bell, resonating. Yes, she said softly. That is exactly what it is like. Something passed between them in the firelight, not the bond or not only the bond, but something more ordinary and more profound simultaneously, the specific understanding that passes between two people who have each, in their separate ways, spent a long time alone with something enormous and found, in this moment, someone else who knows what that is like. She looked away first. Not from weakness. From preservation. I need to know, she said, keeping her voice even. Which of your enemies has the standing to sanction Blackmore, and also the knowledge of what silver blood is and what it could mean for pack authority? That narrows it significantly, he said. I thought it might. He stood, that fluid, unhurried movement of a man who existed in complete accord with his own body, and walked to the window again, looking out at the dawn-lit hills. She watched his back, the slow rise and fall of his breathing, the slight bow of his head as he thought. Elder Voss, he said finally. His voice had changed. It was very flat now. Very controlled. The voice of a man who had just picked up something cold and was deciding what to do with it. Voss has sat on the Conclave for 30 years, he said. He was there when my grandfather died. He would know what the silver bloodline was. He has spent his career preserving Conclave authority against Alpha consolidation. He paused. And he has a relationship with Blackmore that predates my reign. He turned from the window. And your second party, he said. The one that wants you alive. She held his gaze. I do not know yet, she said. But I intend to find out. Selim walked back to the chair and stood beside it rather than sitting, looking down at her with an expression that was composed and certain, and also, beneath those things, something she was only beginning to let herself read. "You came here," he said, "because you needed somewhere to think. Somewhere with walls." "Yes," she said. "And because you needed the bond addressed before it became a liability," he said. He paused. She respected him for saying it plainly. "Yes," she said again. "And because," he said more quietly now, 14 months is a long time to carry something alone, and even the most self-sufficient person reaches a moment where they require another person to stand at their back." The fire breathed between them. She did not answer that one. But she did not deny it either. And from the expression on Selim Dravatha's face as he looked at her across the amber and the firelight and the slowly arriving morning, from the way those amber eyes held hers with an intensity that was no longer entirely about calculation, she understood that he had heard both the silence and what lived inside it. Outside the window, the gold morning pressed itself against Ashenmoor Keep, and somewhere in the hills below, the black grass moved in the wind, and somewhere beyond that, in the territories that spread out across the north like the outstretched hand of a map, something that had been patient for a very long time was beginning to move. She felt it the way she felt approaching weather. Not with her eyes, not with her ears, but in her blood. In the silver. It moved through her like cold water finding the lowest place in the ground, like a tide receiving a signal from a moon no one else could see. She looked at her hand in her lap. The silver threads in her palm brightened fractionally. Not much, not dramatically. Just enough for someone paying close attention to notice. Selim noticed. "What is that?" he said. "A warning," she said. She raised her eyes to his. "Something is coming," she said. And the fire behind her guttered once, hard, as though something outside the stone walls of Ashenmoor Keep had just exhaled. The fire did not recover immediately. It shrank to a low, sullen burn at the base of the logs, throwing less light than it had a moment before, and the shadows in the corners of the room pressed forward the way shadows do when they sense an opportunity. Saren was already on her feet. She did not remember standing. Her body had made that decision without consulting the rest of her, operating on the same deep instinct that had kept her alive for 14 months in circumstances that should have killed her several times over. Her silver-threaded palm was open at her side. The warmth in it was not the warmth of the fire. "How far?" Selim said. His voice was completely level. She understood then, with a clarity that the situation had sharpened to a fine point, that this was who he was beneath all the authority in the silences. A man who became quieter and more precise as danger increased, who ran colder when the temperature of everything else rose. She found, to her distant surprise, that she found this deeply steadying. "Close," she said. "Not at the walls yet. But moving with intention." She crossed to the window and looked out at the morning. The gold had not left the hills, but something had entered it. A quality of light that was not wrong exactly but was altered, the way the air changes in the seconds before a storm makes its presence known, when the atmosphere has already begun to reorganize itself around the approaching violence. "How many people know I came here tonight?" she said. "No one," he said. "I was alone in the eastern forest. I go there when I need to think without being watched." She turned from the window. "Then they did not follow us," she said. "They tracked me." She held up her palm. The silver was brighter now, pulsing faintly, rhythmically, the way a nerve pulses when it is responding to stimulus. "They have something that can find my blood," she said. Osric wrote about this. A seeking instrument. Very old, Conclave made, built from the remnants of the last Morvenan who was taken alive. She kept her voice flat and factual. "It operates on resonance. Silver calls to silver." Selim's expression did not change, but something behind it did. "They took a Morvenan alive," he said. 60 years ago, she said. Around the time of Gorvast. She watched him receive that. Watched him place it alongside everything else. His grandfather, the tapestry, the light pouring from raised hands, and reassemble the history he had been given against the history she was describing, finding the places where they matched and the places where the official account had been carefully, deliberately sutured over the truth. Voss was a young man 60 years ago, he said. Yes, she said. He would have been in the Conclave's junior ranks during Gorvast. Yes. He would have been present for whatever the Conclave did with. He stopped. She watched him stop, watched the sentence close itself before he completed it, because completing it required him to say aloud something that implicated his governing body in an atrocity. And even for a man who was clearly not naive about power, there was a moment of resistance before a truth that large could be spoken. She waited for him. She had learned that patience was the correct response in these moments. Pushing made people defensive. Waiting made them arrive at conclusions on their own, which meant they believed those conclusions more completely. He would have been present, Selim said finally, for whatever was done to them. Yes, she said softly. The silver in her palm pulsed again, stronger, and the distance it was measuring had decreased. We need to move, she said. This is my keep, he said, and there was a note in his voice that was not quite offense but was close to it. The reflexive response of a man who had spent 11 years being the immovable point around which other things moved, not the thing that relocated itself in response to threat. Yes, she said. And whoever is coming knows that. They are not coming here by accident. They are coming here because the Seeker led them here, and they are coming with enough confidence to approach the Alpha King's keep before dawn, which means they have either very significant force or very significant leverage, and neither option improves by us standing still in a lit room next to a window. Beep. Where do you suggest, he said. She had already been thinking about this. She had been thinking about it since she walked through this room and the study and opened the door to the stairwell and smelled the outside air rising from below. The stairwell leads out, she said. Where does it come out? The eastern foundation, he said. There is a passage cut through the hill. It was used for supply transport before the main gates were widened. Does it have a ward on it? He looked at her. Understanding moved across his face. Yes, he said. A concealment ward. Bound to pack magic. She held up her glowing palm. Then whoever is using the Seeker, she said, will lose my signal the moment we are inside a space that is warded. The ward will interfere with the resonance. You can feel the ward from here, he said. I can feel every ward in this building, she said. I have felt them since we walked through the gates. Your keep has 17 distinct wards. The Eastern Passage has one of the oldest. It is deep in the stone, stable, broad spectrum. It will cover us completely. He looked at her for one moment with an expression that was not the careful, guarded study he had been giving her since the forest, but something rawer and less composed. Something that looked very much like a man recalibrating every assumption he had made about what it meant to be the most powerful person in a room. She did not comment on it. She was already moving toward the study door. The stairwell was exactly what she had smelled. Cold stone and old air, and beneath it, the deep mineral scent of earth, the kind of smell that predates human memory and speaks directly to something much older in the body. Selim moved behind her with a silence that she found, despite everything, impressive. A man his size had no right to be that quiet. They descended quickly, the amber light from the sconces thinning as they went deeper, and she kept her glowing palm slightly ahead of her, not to see by. The silver light was too directional for that, but because she could feel the ward at the base of the passage drawing closer, and she wanted to know the exact moment they crossed its threshold. She felt it like stepping through cold water. A full-body sensation, a brief resistance and then acceptance, and then the silver in her palm dimmed. not extinguished but covered, contained, the way a lantern dims beneath a shade. She exhaled. "We are inside it," she said quietly. Behind her, Selim placed one hand briefly against the stone wall of the passage, and she understood he was feeling the ward through the pack magic in his own blood, confirming what she had said. "Yes," he said. "The ward is holding." They moved through the passage in the covered dark. The walls were close enough that her shoulders nearly brushed both sides, and the ceiling was low enough that Selim had to angle his head slightly, and the earth smell intensified until it was the primary reality of the space. Cold and deep and ancient, the smell of a world that existed before packs, before alphas, before all the structures that had been built over the raw, original landscape. She found it calming. She had always found it calming, the smell of deep earth. Her mother had said that was the Morvennan blood speaking, the part of it that was older than wolves, older than the shift, that remembered a time before pack hierarchy when the only authority was the land itself. She had never been sure whether to find that thought comforting or terrifying. Tonight it felt like both. "Tell me what you know about the Seeker," Selim said behind her. His voice low, calibrated to the space. "It is an instrument the Conclave has used historically to locate silver-blooded individuals," she said, matching his volume. Osric found 3 references to it across separate texts spanning 400 years. The earliest description calls it a vein chaser. It requires proximity to function. It is not a long-range tool. Someone has to be within a mile to receive a signal, and within a quarter mile for the signal to be precise enough to track. "So they were already close when it activated tonight," he said. "They were already watching the northern forest," she said. "They were not following me from a distance and happened upon the keep. They were positioned, waiting for me to surface." Pause in the dark. "They knew you would come to me," he said. "Someone did," she said. She reached the end of the passage, a heavy wooden door set into stone, iron-banded, with a particular cold handle feel of something that had not been opened in a long time. She stopped with her hand on the iron and turned to look at Selim in the darkness. She could not see his expression clearly, but she could feel the bond between them, and in the absence of visual information, she was more aware of it than she had been since the forest. A warmth that had nothing to do with temperature, a pull that was not physically located anywhere specific and yet was somehow everywhere simultaneously. She did not address it. "If someone knew I would come to you," she said, "it means they know about the bond." The silence that followed was not empty. It was the specific silence of a deduction landing in a space where it has significant consequence. "The bond is biological," Selim said slowly. "It does not announce itself. It cannot be detected from outside." "No," she said. "But it can be known about." If someone had access to Osric's records, not just the historical texts but his personal research, his correspondence, they would have known that I was silver-blooded. And if they know the old texts well enough to build a vein chaser, they know that silver blood and alpha bloodlines have historically been drawn together. "Morvennan were often bonded to alphas," he said. "Yes," she said. "It is in the historical record." Osric believed it was not coincidence but design, that the silver bloodline developed in proximity to alpha lines specifically because the combination of the two produced something neither could achieve alone. He paused. "He believed that was why the Conclave suppressed the Morvennan," she said. "Not because they were dangerous, but because a silver-blooded wolf bonded to an alpha was a power structure that the Conclave had no framework to control." The cold of the iron door handle pressed into her palm. Above them, through the stone and the earth, she imagined the morning. The gold hills, the black grass, whatever was moving through it toward the keep with an old instrument of detection and a purpose that was becoming, with each passing minute, more clearly defined. "Voss wants to control what he cannot allow to exist freely," she said. "That has always been the pattern. The Conclave has spent 60 years ensuring the silver bloodline stayed scattered and hidden and too fragmented to mean anything. She looked at Selim in the dark. And then I found Osric. And Osric found the histories. And someone found out that the last coherent Morvennan bloodline was not as scattered as the Conclave believed. And now Voss is outside my walls, Selim said. His voice was very flat. Very cold. Or someone working for him, she said. She turned back to the door. When I open this, she said, we will be outside the ward. The Seeker will potentially reactivate if they are still within range. Then we will need to be fast, he said. Or, she said, and she kept her voice completely even, I could give them a signal they are not prepared for. Beep. Explain, he said. She opened her fist in the dark. The silver rose immediately. Freed from the ward suppression, it bloomed across her palm like light, remembering that it is allowed to be light, and it threw both of their faces into cold relief. And she saw his expression clearly for the first time since the passage, and what she saw on it was not fear. It was not even entirely surprise. It was the expression of someone watching a thing they had been told was theoretical become real, and finding that reality exceeded the theory in every dimension. The Seeker operates on resonance, she said. Silver calls to silver. But resonance works in both directions. She looked at her palm. I have spent 14 months learning what I carry. And one of the things Osric documented, in a text so old the Conclave apparently missed it when they burned his library, was that a Morvennan who has fully accepted their blood can reverse the resonance. She looked up at him. I can find the Seeker, she said, before it finds me. The silver light moved across his face, and his amber eyes held hers, and the bond between them hummed in the cold dark of the passage like a live wire waiting for the circuit to close. Then we do not run, he said. No, she said. We go toward them. Yes. He looked at her for one long moment, and she saw in his expression the precise thing she had seen in the forest when she had closed her bleeding fist and told him she had been looking for him for a very long time. That fractional, barely there thing that the Alpha King almost never showed. That he was, despite himself, the smallest degree afraid. Not of what was outside. Of her. Of what she was capable of. Of the possibility that he was standing next to something whose full dimensions he could not yet measure. She held his gaze. She let him look. I told you, she said quietly. I did not come to be found. He pushed open the door. The morning poured in around them, cold and gold and waiting. And Seren, the last coherent thread of a bloodline the Conclave had spent 60 years unraveling, stepped out into it with silver rising from her open hands and the Alpha King at her back. The morning had no warmth in it. It sat on the hills like a painting of itself, gold and vast and entirely indifferent to the 11 figures standing at the edge of Ashenmoor Keep's outer grounds, their breath rising in white columns above their heads, their postures carrying the particular stillness of people who have arrived somewhere with a prepared intention. Seren counted them without moving her eyes quickly. She counted the way she had learned to count, slowly, thoroughly, noting not just numbers but positions, formations, the subtle body language of who was deferring to whom and who was watching the exits and who was watching her. 11 wolves. 6 in shifted form at the perimeter, their massive bodies low and patient in the black grass. 4 in human form flanking a central figure. And the central figure himself, Ulder Voss. She had never seen him in person. She had seen a portrait once, in a document Osric had shown her. A formal Conclave record from 20 years ago, the kind of institutional image designed to project authority and permanence. The man in the black grass 40 meters away looked like that portrait had aged badly and grown something harder in the place of whatever softness time had taken. He was tall for an old man, still straight-spined, with white hair cut close and eyes that were the pale gray of ice over deep water, the color of something that has been cold for so long it has forgotten any other state. He held the seeker in his right hand. She recognized it from Osric's descriptions. A slender instrument of dark metal, no longer than a forearm, with a narrow aperture at one end that was currently pointed directly at her and emitting a faint, high resonance she could feel in her silver blood, the way you feel a note played too close to your ear. A vibration that wanted a response. She did not give it one. Not yet. Beside her, Selim was absolutely still. She could feel his presence at her left shoulder. Not touching, not crowding, simply present, a solid and immovable weight in her peripheral awareness, the way a mountain is present when you stand near it. She was grateful for it in a way she did not examine directly. There was no time for examining things directly. "Elder Voss," Selim said. His voice crossed the 40 meters between them without effort, without elevation, simply arriving at its destination the way all things he said seemed to arrive, with a certainty of something that has never considered the possibility of not being heard. "Alpha King." Voss's voice was dry and precise, the voice of a man who had spent decades in chambers where words were weapons and the sharpest blade one. "I apologize for the hour. The matter is urgent. Matters that arrive before my walls with 6 shifted wolves are generally considered declarations," Selim said. "Not apologies." Voss's pale eyes moved from Selim to Saren. She felt his gaze land on her the way you feel something cold and purposeful make contact with your skin. "The girl," he said. "The girl has a name," Selim said. "I know her name," Voss said. "I know considerably more about her than her name." His gaze did not leave her face. "I know what she carries. I know what she is capable of. And I know that she has arrived at your side at the precise moment that combination becomes most dangerous." "Dangerous to whom?" Saren said. It was the first time she had spoken. She watched Voss adjust. A small recalibration, almost imperceptible, the way a man adjusts when something he had categorized as an object demonstrates that it has opinions. "To the order that has kept 7 packs from destroying each other for 300 years. Voss said. His voice carried the particular conviction of someone who has told themselves a justifying story for so long that they have lost the ability to see the story's seams. "To the structures that prevent any single power from consuming the rest. To everything the Conclave was built to protect." "You mean to everything the Conclave was built to control," she said. Silence. The black grass moved between them, indifferent and continuous. "I have read the texts your scholars burned," she said, and she let that land fully before she continued. "Not Osric's copies. The originals. The ones the Conclave catalogued as destroyed in the fire at Northmere 70 years ago." She watched his pale eyes sharpen. "They were not destroyed. They were moved. By someone inside the Conclave who understood what they contained and did not want them gone. Only hidden." A muscle moved in Voss's jaw. "I know what the Morvanen were," she said. "I know what we were used for. I know about the one you took alive at Gorvast. I know what was done to create the Seeker in your hand." He paused. "I know that the instrument you are holding was built from the extracted blood of a silver-blooded woman who was kept alive for 11 years in a Conclave facility so that her blood could be harvested and refined into something useful." The 4 wolves flanking Voss had gone very still. She did not think they had known that. "I know her name," Saren said quietly. "It was Marin. She was 23 years old when you took her. She died before her 35th birthday in a room with no windows, and the Conclave recorded her death as a prisoner of war." The morning held its breath. She felt Selim beside her, felt the controlled, volcanic stillness of a man receiving information that was reorganizing his understanding of his own world and choosing, with enormous discipline, to hold that reorganization internally until the moment was appropriate for its expression. You cannot understand, Voss said, and for the first time. His voice had lost some of its dry precision, something beneath it surfacing. What would happen if the Morvennan blood and the Alpha bloodline were allowed to operate without constraint? The last time, 400 years ago, entire pack territories ceased to exist. Borders dissolved. The hierarchy was rebuilt, she said, by the people who survived. As it always is. She took one step forward. You have spent 60 years destroying bloodlines and burning histories and hunting children through frozen forests to prevent something that happened 400 years ago from happening again. And the thing you have never allowed yourself to understand, Elder Voss, is that you are not preventing catastrophe. She took another step. You are the catastrophe, she said. Voss raised the seeker. She felt it before she saw the movement, felt the resonance shift, felt it begin to pull at her blood with a force that was no longer passive detection but active extraction, the instrument's aperture widening, the high vibration in her silver rising to a pitch that was the precursor to pain. The shifted wolves lunged. Everything happened in the space between one breath and the next. She heard Selim's sound, that ancient absolute thing that had frozen 6 wolves in a dark forest, amplified now by proximity and genuine rage into something that struck the chest like a physical blow. 3 of the shifted wolves stumbled. But not all of them. 2 broke through. The first one hit Selim from the left, a massive dark-furred body with the weight of a creature that had been fed and trained for violence. And the impact drove him sideways, not down. He did not go down but sideways, his footing broken on the frost-stiffened ground. The second one came for her. She had time to see its eyes, pale and fixed and carrying the particular blankness of a wolf operating under compulsion rather than will, a wolf that had been pointed at a target and emptied of everything except the direction. And then it was in the air and she had no time left for observation. Only for instinct. Her silver blood answered before she did. It rose through her like a tide obeying a moon that had finally risen to its full height, and it came without hesitation, without the effortful reaching she had spent years practicing, without the controlled discipline of a person managing something dangerous. It came as though it had always been waiting for this exact moment to demonstrate what it was when it was not being managed at all. Light poured from her open hands. Not the thin silver threads of controlled ability. Not the careful, directional output of a woman who had spent 3 years afraid of her own depth. This was full. This was everything. The silver light expanded outward from her in a sphere of cold radiance, and the wolf that had been mid-lunge simply stopped. Not thrown back, not hurt, but stopped, held in the silver with a completeness that was absolute and strangely gentle, the way the ocean holds something that has fallen into it. She felt every ward in Ashenmoor keep respond to her. She felt them through the stone and the earth and the distance. All 17 of them, old pack magic that had been set into the foundation of this place across generations, and they recognized what she was and they opened to her the way a lock opens when the correct key is presented, and she felt them flow into her the way water flows into a vessel that has finally been placed correctly. She felt the seeker. She felt Marin's blood inside it. All that remained of a woman who had been taken and used and never given back to the world. And she felt it recognize her across the 30 meters between her open hands and Voss's raised arm. And the recognition was not mechanical, not the cold resonance of instrument detecting signal. It was grief. It was 35 years of isolated grief that had been compressed into dark metal and used as a weapon by the man who had caused it. And it recognized Saren the way a person recognizes, after a very long time in the dark, the presence of someone who has finally come to find them. She felt tears on her face. She did not stop them. She let them fall and she kept her hands open and she poured everything she had into the silver, and she felt it travel the distance to the seeker, and she felt it enter the instrument, and she felt Marin's trapped blood finally, at long last, released. The seeker shattered. Not violently. Not an explosion, not fragments, but a gentle, inevitable dissolution, the dark metal coming apart in Voss's hand like something that had only been waiting for permission to stop holding itself together. The resonance that had been pulling at her blood for weeks, for months, across every mile of running and hiding and surviving, went silent. The quiet that replaced it was the most profound quiet she had ever experienced. Voss stared at his empty hand. The shifted wolves dropped to the ground. Not dead, not even unconscious, but released from whatever compulsion had been woven through the Seeker's operation. And she watched them raise their massive heads with a confused, anguished expression of animals who had just been returned to themselves after a long absence. The 4 flanking wolves took a step backward. Then another. Then they were gone, moving quickly across the hillside, and she did not stop them. He turned. Selim was on one knee. The dark-furred wolf that had hit him was unconscious in the black grass several meters away. She did not know how, she had not seen it. He had handled it in the time she had been handling everything else. But he was on one knee, his right hand pressed flat against the frozen ground. His left arm held close to his body at an angle that told her clearly and immediately that something in it was broken. She crossed the distance between them without deciding to. Her knees hit the ground in front of him and her hands found his face before she had consciously directed them there, tilting it up, finding his amber eyes, and she felt the bond between them close like a current completing itself, like a door that had been standing open finally and fully opening. His eyes found hers. She saw pain in them, real, physical pain, the kind his body language had been refusing to advertise since the moment the wolf hit him. And she saw something else in them too, something that had been building since a frozen forest and a silver-threaded palm and a girl who had told him she had not come to be found. "You are injured," she said. "I am aware," he said. "The arm. Yes. It is broken. I am also aware of that." She pressed her palms gently on either side of his jaw and she let the silver flow, not the enormous full-body outpouring of moments ago, but something quiet and targeted, the part of her gift that Osric had documented in the oldest texts and that she had practiced in secret in 100 borrowed shelters, the part she had never used on another person because it required a degree of trust she had not possessed until this moment. Healing was the most intimate thing the silver blood could do. It required the healer to feel everything the other person was feeling. Every nerve, every break, every place where the body had been damaged and was speaking its damage in the only language it knew. She felt his broken arm as though it were her own. She felt 3 years of accumulated old wounds that had healed imperfectly. A rib, a collarbone, something in his left knee that had been badly damaged a long time ago and had rebuilt itself without assistance. She felt the weight of 11 years of rulership carried in the muscles of his back and shoulders, the particular physical vocabulary of a man who had stood as the immovable point for so long that the effort of it had become structural. She poured silver into all of it. She felt him exhale, a long, slow, controlled breath that was not steady and made no pretense of being steady, and she kept her hands on his face and her eyes on his and she held the connection until she felt his arm resolve itself beneath the light, until she felt the acute pain move from sharp to dull to something the body could absorb and file. He reached up and took one of her wrists in his hand. Not to remove it, just to hold it. She let him. Behind her she heard Voss. Not movement, not threat. A sound she had not expected and would not forget. An old man's exhale. The sound of someone who has carried a justification for so long that they have fused with it, and have just watched it come apart, and do not know yet who they are without it. She did not turn around. She kept her eyes on Selim. "It is over," Selim said, not to her but to Voss, his voice carrying across the morning without effort. She heard Voss's footsteps. Low. Moving away. She heard them cross the frozen ground and move down the hillside, and she listened until she could not hear them anymore, until the morning had absorbed them, and then she released a breath she had been holding for 14 months. Selim's hand tightened slightly on her wrist. She looked at him. The amber in his eyes had changed. Not color, not temperature, but quality. The way firelight changes when the thing burning it has stopped fighting and simply allowed itself to burn. "You wept," he said quietly. "Yes," she said. "For the woman in the seeker." "For Marin," she said. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment, looking at her face in the gold morning light with a careful, full attention of someone who is no longer calculating and has not decided yet what to do in the absence of calculation. "You freed her," he said. "I hope so," she said. "I believe so." The black grass moved around them, continuous and indifferent and beautiful. The hills of Ashenmoor spread outward in every direction, and somewhere in the stone above them, 17 wards hummed in their foundations, and she could feel every one of them. Not as a threat, not as a puzzle to be dismantled, but as something she was standing inside of, something that had opened itself to her and that she had, in this strange and irreversible morning, come to be part of. Selim rose slowly from his knee. He drew her upright with him, his hand moving from her wrist to her hand with a deliberateness that was very much in character. Nothing careless, nothing accidental, every movement a decision. They stood together in the gold morning outside the walls of Ashenmoor Keep, and the bond between them was not a pull anymore, not a tide, not a wire waiting for a circuit. It was a foundation, something that had stopped reaching and started simply being. She looked out at the hills, at the black grass, at the pale sky that was becoming bluer by degrees as the morning committed itself. She thought about Marin. She thought about her mother. She thought about Osric and the burned library, and 3 years of frozen mud and borrowed shelters and waking at every sound. She thought about a tapestry in a stone corridor and an old man's pale eyes and an instrument of dark metal dissolving in an empty hand. She thought about the girl who had run through a pine forest with bleeding palms and the specific, private terror of someone who has been alone with something enormous for so long that they have nearly forgotten what it was like to be seen. She felt Selim's hand around hers. She did not let go. "What happens now?" she said. He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried everything a voice can carry when it has finally stopped performing certainty and is simply telling the truth. "Now," he said, "we rewrite what they burned." She turned to look at him. He was looking at the horizon, that vast, gold-lit, open territory that stretched out from Ashenmoor in every direction, 7 packs wide and centuries deep, full of histories that had been suppressed and bloodlines that had been scattered and truths that had been buried under the weight of other people's fear. "Together," she said. He turned to look at her. And the Alpha King, who feared nothing, who had ended a war with his hands, who had spent 11 years as the immovable point around which everything else turned, looked at the silver-blooded girl who had run through a frozen forest and refused to be commanded and freed the dead with her open hands. And he said the only word that had ever been true between them from the moment the bond had pulled taut in a dark wood, and neither of them had been the same since. "Together," he said. The morning opened around them like a page. And for the first time in a very long time, she believed that what was written on it would be allowed to remain. Some bloodlines are not meant to be erased. They are meant to be remembered. And the ones who carry them, hunted, hidden, surviving in the cold dark of a world that feared what they were, they do not break. They wait. And when the right moment arrives, they do not merely endure. They become the thing that makes the world remember what light was always capable of.